Well, welcome back. Good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, as it's been said, I'm going to be looking at overcoming common mental health conditions. And I just want to re-echo what Pastor Darlington said, that I think it's a big step that we're taking today. And everyone can acknowledge that we are really stepping out ahead of the pack, and that's a great thing. So I think we are privileged people, and it's a blessing that we are actually doing what we are doing today. And I expect that over the years and over the months that many other people, many other churches will begin to embrace that. But it's quite a topical thing. Everybody is talking about mental health, the government is interested, everyone is interested. So it's really very important that we are taking a lead on that. So okay, right. So for the sake of those who are on here, Dr. T. Ayodele Ajayi, I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I work in one of the mental health trusts across the country or in Southeast, and I also do a number of other roles in my charity work. Right. So because I'm speaking as a professional, as Dr. Fadika said, I need to do a disclaimer, just basically saying that we've done our due diligence to make sure that the information is accurate as possible. However, this is not a consultation. It's actually it's just for informational purposes only. So for anyone who wants a personal consultation, it's best to please speak to your GP or to your mental health provider in order to make decisions on your health. So what are the things I'm going to go through? Dr. Fadika has very kindly laid a very solid foundation, so I'm just going to build on that. What is mental health? Because we know very often, particularly in the African community, we say that person has got mental health. Every one of us has mental health. You know, people say, oh, it's got mental health. Every one of us have got mental health. Just like we have physical health, we also have mental health. What are mental illnesses? What are the common mental health problems? I'm going to focus on depression, and then I'm going to address some of the myths and the mental illness, myths around mental illnesses and mental health interventions. I want to start by saying that indeed, that a lot of things that we are finding out in neuroscience and that science is doing actually supports a lot of things that we already know from scriptures. I think some of them have been alluded to already, in terms of faith, in terms of well-being, in terms of love, in terms of caring for people, and that how that impacts positively on mental well-being. So what exactly is mental health? Mental health is actually a state of well-being, which is not just absence of mental illness. It's actually a state where one is able to actualize, one is able to fulfill one's potential. So that means that when we have our mental health intact, we are actually able to fulfill the destinies that we have in Christ. But also we are able to cope with the pressures of life, COVID lockdown, the things that the up and downs of life, and we are not exempted from that, because the Bible says that in the world we have tribulations, but we should be of good cheer. And so that's part of the things, coping with the stresses of life, but also being able to work productively, being able to contribute to community. And those are the four things that you look at really. According to WHO, that those are the things that you look at when you think about mental health. Is this person really in a state of mental health? But then the other thing to look at is, I actually like the definition given by the Public Health Agency of Canada. They actually give a more holistic view of mental health. They actually talk about the spiritual dimension of mental health. And the reason is because we are now knowing that actually there's a spiritual dimension to human beings, and that even the Royal College of Psychiatrists is acknowledging that really as psychiatrists we should not just be looking at the physical and emotional well-being of people, that there is a spiritual dimension that people bring to us that we need to be aware of. So what does the Public Health Agency of Canada say? They say it's our mental health is our ability or capability to feel, to think, and to act in a way that enables us to enjoy life and also to deal with the stresses of life. So it's going back to the stresses of life again. But they now also say that it's also about our emotional and spiritual well-being. So there's a spiritual dimension that they introduce to it, and it talks about culture, it talks about equity, it talks about justice. You see, when I look at all of those things, the thing that stands out to me is I think about church. Because really, when I think about all those different things, all those different aspects, actually, interconnection, you think about personal dignity, all of those things are things that actually it's very easy for church to be able to supply that and to help people to be able to fulfill, to be well mentally. So what is mental illness? When somebody breaks a bone, we look at their bone and we put them in a cast. When somebody, if they have thyroid problems, maybe their thyroid are not functioning right, we give them thyroid supplements. When we are looking at mental illnesses, we are looking at three areas of life. We are looking at their thinking, people's thinking, we are looking at our emotions or feelings, and we are looking at behavior. Those are the three main areas that you really look at, and they can be so interconnected. And I like the question that Abolade asked, that when does it become a problem? So mental illnesses they result in changes in people's thinking, people's feeling, and people's behavior. It becomes a problem when it begins to compromise and impair on the way somebody functions. When somebody is not able to go to work, or maybe somebody is becoming, having to take time off work, or maybe somebody's social interaction. For instance, people who come to church, they are usually, after the service, they will usually wait and interact with other people. But they come in just as the clock strikes 0, so that they don't have to interact with anyone. And as soon as we say the grace, they dash out of the door. The reason being that they are avoiding social contact because they can't just face it. So all of those things are being affected. So it's when there are changes in our thinking, in our feeling, and in our behavior, to the point in which it then affects the way we function in society, the way we function at work, the way we function in our family life, that it becomes a problem. That's when it's mental illness. So how common are they? We know that 1 in 4 people in the UK will usually at some point report mental problems. But what's actually significant is that recently there has been very recently there was some study that actually showed that post-COVID, that it looks like when people talk about mental health distress, that double the number of people who used to report mental distress are now reporting mental distress post-COVID. So it's certainly a problem. It's certainly something that people are concerned about. And we also do know, there was a question asked about children, that 10% of school children have a diagnosable mental illness. And particularly, of particular importance is our young adults. The fact that we know that they're an area, that's a group that they're really a concern about. For instance, there was some study as well that showed that actually, out of all the age groups, when we talk from the impact that COVID had on mental well-being, that the young adults between the ages of 18 and 34 were the most affected. They were the ones that said that their mental health was actually most took a knock as a result of the lockdown and COVID-19. So, in answer to the question, what causes mental illness? We don't know exactly one thing that causes mental illness. What we know is that it's usually a combination of a lot of things. It's not just one stone that hits that causes it. It's actually usually a number of things. And a good way to summarize that is to look at nature, nurture, and negative life events. When we look at nature, we are looking at if somebody has a family history of mental illness, for instance, if somebody, for instance, their family has depression, then a parent who has depression, then there's a 1 in 3 chance that that person would come down with depression. But it's a chance, because there's also something that can be done about it. And that's the good bit, that actually The fact somebody doesn't have to just raise their hands and say, oh yes, that's it. So that means that inevitably I'm in the firing line. It's not actually the case, because there are certain things that one can do to actually bring down that risk significantly. And that's something we are going to get to as I go on. So we've looked at nature. There's also still talking about nature. You find out that everybody has their own personality. There are people who are introverted, who tend not to discuss things, who tend not to share burdens. That could put one at risk. Not having confiding relationships in one's life, for instance, people that you can really talk to and unburden your heart to, that would actually put one at risk. So in terms of nurture is about childhood. It's about how somebody was raised. And we do know that childhood adversity in form of either physical abuse, either mental abuse, either sexual abuse, or emotional neglect, all of those things actually puts one at risk of mental illness as well in the future. And that's why parenting is quite it's a responsibility. And I usually say to people that when you are doing your parenting well, you're actually sowing well into the next generation and the next generation to come, because you're actually saving, you're actually limiting the risk that those people will become mentally unwell for the future. Every time we go into consultation rooms, there is hardly any time when we come into consultation and we don't see, when you look back, there's something that happened mostly in childhood, and it could be a loss, it could be physical illness, many times it's because the parents were neglectful. So negative life events would be chronic physical illnesses. Just as I was going to come up, Brother Femi came and said, I found out that in the job that I do, there's quite a lot of link between people who have cancers and people who have long-term illnesses, and at the bottom you usually see depression, because they go a lot of physical problems is also linked with depression and with mental problems. Social stressors, we've talked about the stresses of loss, job loss, career loss, breakups. All of those things can actually tip people over into mental problems. And of course, immigration issues, domestic violence, all of those things are associated with mental difficulties. So, my main theme today is really on common mental problems. And why are they common mental problems? They are common mental problems because when you group those mental difficulties together, you find out that under an umbrella term, they are the most common. They account for about maybe 15% of the mental problems. So they are called common mental problems. And namely, they are depression and anxiety. Depression, I'm going to go very closely into depression. But when we look at the anxiety part of it, anxiety is really a morbid or irrational state of fear. It's basically that's what it is. Being overtly worried to the point in which it's affecting our functioning in life. And that could be, those forms of anxiety are different. There's generalized anxiety where somebody is just always keyed up. They can't ever rest. It's like, the easiest way to put it is that somebody worries when there's nothing to worry about, because it's almost like one cannot relax all of the time, 24/7, every wakeful time, one is on hyper alert. There's panic disorder in which periods of just overwhelming waves of anxiety, that comes in peaks and troughs. Somebody just suddenly, for no apparent reason, nothing has happened, they just suddenly feel overwhelmed and they are struggling to keep their calm. There is obsessive compulsive disorder, which is really about intrusive thoughts. People get thoughts that just they know that these thoughts are irrational. For instance, somebody cannot just rest at night because they think that there's going to be a break-in, and they will go and check their doors. They will check their doors, going around the house 20 times over. Yet, even after then, they are still not convinced that there's not going to be a break-in, or that they've locked their doors well. So there's post-traumatic stress, which is about after somebody has experienced a trauma in life. So it could be trauma. It's usually a life-threatening event. And as a result of that, the brain is not able to process that well. And it's almost like they then have experiences in their lives when they relive those difficult trauma. Maybe somebody's been involved in a road traffic accident, or somebody has had a break-in in which somebody attacked them, and then they then have nightmares about those incidences, but not only nightmares, in broad daylight as well. Maybe they see a car that is similar, of a similar model to the car that hit them, and it then looks like they are going through the process again, that experience again. So that's post-traumatic stress, and phobia is really about avoiding, having a morbid fear to the point in which one avoids a particular situation. It could be fear of traveling in public transport, it could be fear of going out of the house, it could be fear of being in open places, but it's such that it prevents people who actually not stop going to work, people will stop going anywhere just because of those fears. And social phobia is about being in a social situation, making somebody being overtly concerned about making a fool of oneself in public, or about doing the right things, doing the right things socially. So depression. So we said that everybody knows that depression, low moods is involved. But it's such a low mood that it's not the one that shifts very easily. It lasts for at least 2 weeks. But it's more than that. There's also a classical pattern to that type of low mood. It's such that people find that when they wake up in the morning, they don't feel like they're able to face the day. It just feels like, oh God, it's another day. Not thank God it's another day, but oh God, it's another day. And then that just, the person, and as the day wears on, the mood improves, the mood gets better. But then, when the another day comes again, there's that repeat of that cycle. And when that's been done, when that passes for 2 weeks, it's also associated with poor energy. Somebody has not done any physical work, no mental work, but they just feel tired all of the time. And of course, the other symptom that is also common is loss of energy, loss of interest in life. It just feels like life becomes a chore. It feels like one is just going through the motions and life has just become empty. It has lost zeal, it has lost joy. So it's just like one is just like a robot going through motions. And I like the point that was made about the fact that sometimes the symptoms that people have are not classical. One of the symptoms that people have that is not classical is that we do know from men, for instance, that aggression, undue aggression, being irritable, and being violent is one of the things that can manifest as depression in men. And also that sometimes people turn to on healthy coping skills. For instance, people can begin to gamble, people can begin to use substances, people can begin to use alcohol, and this is out of ordinary. So sometimes it's not always classical, and it's important to be on the lookout for those things as well. Of course, we talked about the fact that somebody can then begin to feel hopeless, helpless, and worthless. And if that persists, then one could be in a situation in which one actually feels that there's no point going on with life. So that's for depression, and we do know that obviously that suicide is something that is connected with depression, and particularly for untreated depression. The challenging thing about all this is that it's actually possible to treat these things. It's possible to actually address them, and there are things that we do also know that only in the low-income countries, for instance, that only 75% of people who have mental problems do not get any intervention. They don't, either because it's not recognized or because they haven't engaged with treatment. So, what are the things that we can do? What are the things that can be done? Somebody who identifies that they've got depression, what are the things that they can do? The first thing is actually that it's possible that there are a lot of things that can be done. One, it's recognition. And recognition actually talks about really learning to know about the condition. Some of the things that we are doing today. And there are quite a lot of websites that are really very good with information. There's the Every Mind Matters website. There is also the Mental Foundation. They all provide information in very lay language that people can actually go to. There's a Royal College of Psychiatrists website as well, where people can actually access information about mental problems. But also, there are organizations now that actually have information that is focused on Christians, that is targeted to the Christian audience. There is the www.llttf.livinglifetothefull.com. They haven't really said they're a Christian organization, but when you look at some of the ethos, you'll see that there is some background there. There is the Sanctuary, which is a Canadian organization that actually dispenses mental information in a way that is relevant to the church community. So apart from that, we've talked about exercise, we've talked about good diet, we've also talked about the fact that it's important to have good associations in one's life, good connections. I also want to talk about certain things that sometimes people take for granted. One of them is music. There is quite a lot of information that supports the use of music in lifting mood. Music is a powerful thing, and music can actually help in that regard. So worship music, for instance, is something to think about. When we think about exercise as well, it's important to be creative. When people think about exercise, they think, oh, I have to go to the gym or I have to run on the treadmill, but you don't have to do that. You could do praise aerobics, for instance. Praise aerobics is something that you could switch on the YouTube video and do praise aerobics for 30 minutes a day, and that's a good thing. You could go on a prayer walk. So in that case, you are praying, but also you're also burning energy, and that exercise is known to release happy chemicals in the brain that actually help us to get well. Okay, that's the same thing. Okay, I think also having control over our environment is a very important thing. There's what is called ecotherapy now. Ecotherapy is really about engaging with nature and altering the atmosphere in our living spaces to be able to actually make them in a way that is conducive. And we do know that that's also good for mood, that also actually has a positive effect on mood. And you can try it. You try and go out into the wilds, go out into listen to the sounds of birds singing, listen to smell the flowers. All of those things actually have an impact on our mood and our well-being. So talking therapies, we've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is really about the main thing that cognitive behavioral therapy talks about is this, that as we think thoughts, and those thoughts lead to feelings, and those feelings will then lead to behavior. A typical way to think about it is somebody gets a letter, maybe that they've taken an interview, or maybe they had an email in the last night and they didn't get the interview, they didn't get the job. And this morning they wake up and they think, what's the point? I've been applying all this while and I haven't got the job. So I just don't feel like doing anything today. I'm just going to lie in bed and I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to stay in bed. That's a thought. That thought was obviously, what sort of emotions would that person be feeling? Depressed, okay, yes. Any other emotions? Sad, yes.
Mood swing.
Okay, yeah, they could have a mood swing, they could, yes. So, okay, they could be anxious about the future. But all of those are negative emotions. They then stay in bed and they don't do anything. They just stay in bed. And what then happens? What do we think they're going to be doing when they're staying in bed?
Negative thoughts.
Yes, they are going to continue to ruminate and to ruminate and to ruminate, and they will look at their situation in 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, all over. And by the time, and we know that those thoughts will fester. The thoughts grow and they become even, they grow and they become even more and more, they become bigger than they really are. And what then happens? That person just says, oh yes, I think I should just stay in bed anyway. It doesn't look like there's any point. And so if that goes on over and over again like that, they continue in that way. So what cognitive therapy teaches to do is to actually be able to identify those toxic thinking patterns. And when it identifies the toxic thinking patterns, it actually says that if you're able to break the thoughts, then you're able to control the feeling, and then you're able to control the behavior. And I do know that CBT is very effective. I usually say that it's very close to, in fact, it's based on the foundation of scriptures, Romans 12:1-2, that we should be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and also that is the man thinks in his heart, so is he. Exercise, we've talked about. Social prescribing is really about engaging with community. It's about going out there and doing things. We do know, for instance, that volunteering, even people who are unemployed, volunteering one's time, we know has been linked to better outcomes. And it's also associated with better mood. Antidepressants. So quite a lot has been said about antidepressants, but I wanted to address a few myths that are associated with mental illness and with antidepressants. One, antidepressants, when they are required, do not make the condition worse. There might be adverse effects, but people that in our community, people think, oh, yes, if people take them, then their conditions are worse. That's not correct. They could have adverse effects, and what they need to do is to speak to the prescriber to actually get it changed. The other thing that people say is that, if I ask for help, then my children will be taken away, and my children will go into social services care. It might sound very far-fetched to us, but this is something I hear every day. People who do need to engage with services, but they don't, because they think that their children are going to be taken away. But the reality is that we actually know that it's those who don't engage, who don't ask for help, that things then get out of hands to the point in which they are no longer able to manage the situation, that actually end up that their children are taken, or that their children then go into social services care one way or the other. The other one that people also think about is this, is that if I engage, if I ask for help, it means that I'm spiritually weak, or that it means that I'm not a strong Christian. But we also know that that's not true. We know that that doesn't work, and that actually the reality is what we know that works in mental health is actually a three-pronged approach, where you look at a biological approach, you look at talking therapies, you look at social approach. But now the Royal College is also telling us that actually we need to be looking at this spiritual model as well. So, and there is plenty of science out there that actually shows that faith is good for mental well-being. People who have a sense of gratitude. One of the simple things that one could add to one's life when one is having a mental challenge is to keep a gratitude journal. A gratitude journal about the things that are going well. And what science says is that the more you actually think about the things that are going well and you are grateful to God for, the more your brain finds those things. So it's like it almost becomes, at some point, it's almost like an auto drive, where the more thankful you are, the more you have reasons to be thankful. And of course, the other one is about meditation. And very quickly, every time I talk about meditation, every time I very quickly say the only meditation I know is meditation of scriptures. The only one I practice and I can approve of is meditation of the scriptures, and I know that it works. So science also tells us that actually that when we meditate, that it prevents our brain, it slows down the aging of the brain. Not only so, that people who meditate manage stress less. And of course, two scriptures that I think about is Isaiah 26 verse 3, that it keeps in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him because he trusts in him. And of course, we also do know Philippians 4:8 tells us of the things that we can meditate on. So meditation does work for mental well-being. People who meditate are less stressed, and also it improves anxiety, and also that there are better outcomes in depression. And the third one, in terms of the impact that faith will have, is the ability to be able to let go and practice forgiveness. That's also another one that's been very heavily researched, and it does show that really when somebody is holding on to unforgiveness, it's toxic. It releases toxic chemicals in the body, and when somebody is doing that, it's like taking poison. So it's like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. So the final point I want to make is that actually that in terms of approaching mental problems or mental difficulties, it's not an either-or approach when we include spirituality. That everyone should, we should have an holistic approach. We should think about it not just from the medical point of view, but from spiritual or support point of view, prayer point of view. Everything works together, including psychological therapies and including social support. So the final message actually is that please do get help. The first place to go to will be one's GP. That's the very first port of call. The GPs are the ones that are equipped to really know how to, where to direct people to, and how for them to get help. And if there are any questions for this session, we will, during the breakout sessions, we'll still be addressing questions. So I'll just leave it at that.